It can be perplexing to see someone in the entertainment industry who has achieved considerable success yet is consistently disrespected and criticized by a wide swath of the public. In the case of Nick Cannon, the persistent negativity surrounding his name has always been somewhat puzzling. People frequently label him as corny, unfunny, untalented, or downright annoying. When his name is invoked in casual conversations, it is not unusual to hear individuals say they have never really found him appealing or that they cannot quite put their finger on why he bothers them. And among the endless string of reasons and petty quips people lob at him, one detail that seems to fan the flames of discontent is his extraordinarily large and rapidly growing number of children. The revelation that Nick Cannon has had 12 kids with 6 different women sends some critics into an even deeper state of irritation and incredulity, as if his personal life choices merely confirm their suspicions that he is someone worthy of their negative judgment, while Cannon's own missteps, public statements, and career decisions have certainly contributed to his near-universal dislike in certain circles. The roots of this hatred can be traced back far earlier than his recent media controversies, and often for reasons so insignificant and oddly specific that they reveal more about the cultural landscape than about Nick himself. Before he became a fixture in tabloids and internet gossip due to his prolific fatherhood, Cannon was grinding as a young performer in the 1990s, chasing the dream of many aspiring entertainers from Southern California. People often forget that Nick's earliest roles date back to when he was still a teenager, finding small but meaningful opportunities on Nickelodeon's youth-oriented sketch comedies such as All That and Kenan and Kel. These late 90s shows were not just silly after-school programs. For those familiar with the era, they were cultural touchstones that shaped the millennial generation's sense of humor and pop culture sensibilities. Nickelodeon was in a unique period then, investing in the idea that kids could carry big shows and that young performers could provide a kind of authentic voice not typically seen in children's television before that point. During that time, Cannon's presence was visible enough to catch the eyes of industry insiders, leading to various appearances, cameos, and one-off roles that eventually grew into something more substantial. In 2002, Nick leveraged this momentum into The Nick Cannon Show, a short-lived and now largely forgotten series aimed at the tween demographic. The show, lasting 2 brief seasons, suffered from poor ratings and negative feedback. Critics of the era often described it as lacking direction or failing to understand what its target audience wanted. It was canceled quietly, overshadowed by other Nickelodeon offerings and never solidifying its place in the pantheon of beloved children's programming. Yet it would be overly simplistic to say that the cancellation of the Nick Cannon Show was what made people dislike him. Many aspiring artists and entertainers have had projects fail, especially child stars attempting to transition into broader markets. That year, 2002, was not a total failure for him. He landed a lead role in Drumline, an upbeat and proud celebration of HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, marching band culture. Drumline put a spotlight on an American tradition that had been historically overlooked by mainstream Hollywood. These bands, often featuring top-tier musicianship and complex choreography, represent a vital part of African American collegiate history and community pride. With a box office revenue of about $57 million, Drumline was considered a commercial success. Even though critics were divided over its narrative and characterization, the general public response indicated that Nick Cannon was now associated with a well-known, feel-good project. Still, for all the goodwill the film generated, it never fully dismantled the notion that Cannon's persona was that of a corny guy, someone who never played the effortless cool kid or the tough streetwise character. In Hollywood and high school hallways alike, the band kids or intellectual nerds, despite their talents, often become the butt of jokes. This echoes larger cultural themes. Mainstream audiences, especially young ones, often gravitate toward roles that exude effortless confidence, rebellion, or swagger. Cannon's on-screen image, at least at that time, embraced a kind of wholesome earnestness. While Drumline showcased him as a talented drummer rising to prominence in a historically resonant environment, it did not shift the paradigm of how he was perceived. Not long after Drumline, Cannon took on another role that cemented his image in the public mind. Love Don't Cost a Thing, released in 2003, cast him as Alvin Johnson, an awkward, nerdy teen who lacks social capital and struggles to make himself appear cool enough to attract the popular girl in school. Scenes from that film still float around the internet, with Cannon's character trying desperately to sound hip and fashionable, failing hilariously, and serving as a blueprint for what some people imagine Nick Cannon to be like in real life. In Hollywood, the correlation between an actor and the characters they play can be strangely strong, especially for young audiences who have not yet grasped the separation between performance and reality. For Cannon, the early roles became albatrosses. They suggested a personality type he never intended to carry permanently. Although many child and teen stars face similar challenges, Macaulay Culkin, for instance, struggled with shedding the Home Alone kid persona. Cannon's issue was that he did not step into roles that countered this image soon enough to reshape the public's view. Instead, his persona seemed locked in place, a corny, try-hard nice guy who never quite fit the mold of a star who was cool or edgy. The deeper irony here is that many people assumed Cannon came from an affluent, sheltered upbringing because he appeared on TV as a teenager. There is often a myth that to land early television roles, a performer must have industry connections or a silver spoon upbringing. In reality, Nick's path was a far cry from what people imagined. He was not raised in a cozy suburban home or a Hollywood Hills mansion. He escaped from the often dangerous environment of Southeast San Diego's Lincoln Park area, notorious for the presence of the Lincoln Park Bloods. His father, James Cannon, was one of the original members of this blood set, which would have placed his son Nick dangerously close to gang life had things not shifted dramatically. James, along with Nick's mother, Beth, had Nick while they were both still in high school. This early parenthood placed Nick in the Bay Vista housing projects, an area where opportunities for upward mobility were slim. James eventually got into legal trouble, served time in prison, and emerged from incarceration a changed man. Seeking a more stable life, he left California for North Carolina, where he embraced religion, studied ministry, and became a televangelist, an on-screen preacher who used local TV broadcasts to spread his message. Although James started a new family in North Carolina, he did not abandon Nick. Instead, Nick spent part of his childhood in California's projects with his grandmother and mother, and other parts of it with his father's family in North Carolina. When visiting his father, Nick found himself in front of a camera at a shockingly young age, singing, dancing, and even performing stand-up comedy as an 8-year-old on his father's public access show. It was through these experiences, switching between two very different worlds, that Nick Cannon learned to adapt quickly, honing his ability to entertain, to present himself well on camera, and to charm audiences with an innocence born of necessity rather than privilege. Back in California, Cannon used these performance instincts to appear at local clubs, open mics, and talent showcases. This pursuit would eventually take him far beyond any city limits. His big professional break came at Lollapalooza, a comedy event in Atlanta that attracted industry professionals scouting new talent. There, Cannon caught the attention of Will Smith's talent agency. Smith, already a global superstar and household name, saw potential in Nick. The result was life-altering. Will Smith helped him secure an entertainment manager and a record deal with Jive Records. This was an extraordinary leap for someone just getting started. Suddenly, the kid who people would later dismiss as corny was receiving mentorship and support from one of Hollywood's most beloved figures, a performer who himself understood the challenges of being labeled corny back when he was the Fresh Prince. Cannon pitched multiple ideas, television shows, albums, hosting gigs, and Smith responded positively, noting that Nick reminded him of a younger version of himself. For a teenager who had just escaped the influence of gang territory and poverty, this validation wasn't just a financial opportunity. It was a cultural green light signaling that he belonged. Still, if Nick Cannon hoped that success in the music industry would help refashion his image, he would learn quickly that perception is not so easy to manipulate. Cannon kicked off his music career trying to break free from what he perceived as the corny Nickelodeon image. He debuted a single called Gigolo, featuring none other than R. Kelly, who at the time was still widely revered as an R&B icon. Although Kelly's reputation would later be irreversibly tarnished by a series of devastating criminal allegations, back in 2003 and 2004, he was considered a major musical powerhouse, capable of elevating lesser-known acts. Gigolo peaked at number 24 on the Billboard Hot 100, respectable for a newcomer like Cannon. Yet despite this modest success, the collaboration was something of a double-edged sword. Standing next to R. Kelly, who exuded a kind of controversial, sexually charged bravado, made Cannon appear even less cool by comparison. Instead of transforming his public persona, Nick's first major foray into music illustrated the glaring gap between his persona and the standard of hip-hop R&B masculinity that the audience had come to expect. He released a few more singles, but none made a substantial impact, and by 2006 his music career fizzled, leaving him effectively pigeonholed as a comedic actor, teen TV alumnus, and not much else. From a broader cultural perspective, Cannon's struggle to find artistic credibility resonates with the experiences of many black entertainers who attempt to break out of the roles assigned to them. He was successful, undeniably, given his producing deals, hosting gigs, and network relationships. But he never represented the aspirational archetype that young fans of hip-hop, R&B, or Hollywood's cool kids wanted to emulate. Ironically, he had more business savvy than many of his peers. He had been an executive producer on Drumline and The Nick Cannon Show. He brokered deals with Jive Records and was in many respects running his own brand as a young adult. His wealth, influence, and ability to navigate the business side of showbiz were extraordinary, especially for a young black performer who did not have a blueprint for how to manage so many facets of his career at once. This business-minded approach led him to his next major opportunity, one that would define him in the public eye more than any film or album ever could. Wild 'N Out, which premiered in 2005 on MTV, was not just another sketch comedy and improv game show. It became a cultural phenomenon over time, blending hip-hop influences, guest appearances by musicians and comedians, and a freestyle battle format that felt authentic and spontaneous. The show, which continues to run with over 20 seasons, became a platform for rising comedians and a destination spot for fans looking for something more raw and music-infused than standard TV comedy. Cannon, serving as the host and executive producer, welcomed a rotating crew of performers who would one day become household names in comedy and entertainment. He opened the door for talents like Cat Williams, Pete Davidson, DC Young Fly, Taran Killam, Timothy DeLaGhetto, Atheon Crockett, DeRay Davis, Mikey Day, and many others, giving them a chance to shine and gain footholds in the industry. Wild 'N Out made it clear that Cannon had learned from his mentor, Will Smith. He understood that the ultimate flex was to elevate others, to create a platform that could help cultivate the next generation of entertainers. Yet even as the show soared in popularity, Cannon remained something of a public punching bag. His role as host and producer meant he was often the target of roast-style jokes. In the universe of improv and freestyle comedy, no holds are barred. Everyone understood that Nick was not considered the funniest or the coolest performer on the show. He was a facilitator, an enabler of talent, and a magnet for comedic insults. He endured this gracefully, as if knowing that providing this stage was part of his legacy, even if it meant he would never be fully respected as a stand-up powerhouse or a hip-hop heavyweight. While Wild 'N Out increased his clout among insiders, it was his personal life that suddenly gave him a strange new form of cultural capital. He married Mariah Carey, one of the most iconic pop divas in music history. Carey, who had sold well over 200 million records globally, with citations regularly giving her the title of having over 220 times platinum status, if counting individual albums, singles, and global sales combined, represented a tier of celebrity that felt almost untouchable. When Nick Cannon managed to win her heart and proposed to her just weeks after meeting, the public was stunned. Mariah Carey was no ordinary star. She was a 5-octave vocal phenomenon, a pop and R&B legend who had reinvented herself multiple times, breaking records held by the Beatles and setting new standards for vocal acrobatics. For Cannon, marrying her was a bold move that elevated his profile astronomically. Suddenly, he was not just the corny kid from Nickelodeon, not just the guy from Drumline. He was the husband of a pop superstar. For a time, it was harder to hate on him. Sure, cynics scoffed and wondered how he had managed to land such a global icon, but others interpreted it as proof that Cannon had matured into a confident man who could hold his own next to one of the greatest divas the industry had ever known. And their relationship, at least for a few years, looked happy, genuine, and stable, something not easily achieved in Hollywood. However, not everyone was thrilled by their union, and the resentment came from a figure known for his lyrical prowess and long-standing grudges, Marshall Mathers, better known as Eminem. Eminem and Mariah Carey had a bizarre and lingering feud that had begun after an alleged relationship around 2001. M maintained they had been intimate. Carey consistently denied it. Over the years, the back and forth between them had simmered like a pot about to boil over. By 2009, Eminem escalated matters beyond a personal spat and dragged Cannon into the fray through his music. On the track, Bagpipes from Baghdad, Eminem spewed venom at Mariah and fired shots at Nick, mocking both their relationship and Nick's masculinity. Eminem called Mariah a variety of insults and told Nick to back off, making it clear that even though Mariah had denied the relationship, M still felt some lingering bitterness. This track angered Cannon, who responded not with a diss track, but an extensive blog post, a format far less menacing and traditionally hip-hop than one might expect in a rap feud. In that post, Nick's emotions oscillated from confusion to pity to anger. He contemplated seeking Eminem out physically, then sarcastically mocked the rapper, labeling him Slim Lamey and calling him the grown man who lies about being with a woman. Cannon's angry but meandering response reinforced the corny label. He leaned into it, even joking that he would bring his whack rhymes out of retirement, a statement that lacked the rhetorical force needed to counter Eminem's lyrical prowess. The beef lingered awkwardly. Mariah Carey eventually responded to Eminem in her own way, releasing Obsessed, a catchy, chart-ready track that mocked M as a delusional stalker. The song's undeniable pop appeal made it a kind of anti-diss track that played constantly on mainstream radio and forced Eminem to hear it repeated, a melodic humiliation for the rapper who prided himself on lyrical dominance. Eminem countered with the warning, a brutal graphic response that would be considered career suicide in today's more socially conscious climate. Fans were split along predictable lines. Eminem's loyal followers argued he outclassed Mariah lyrically. Mariah's fans championed the success and cleverness of Obsessed. Everyone else largely agreed that Nick Cannon had embarrassed himself by failing to respond in a manner that elevated his stature. Cannon did himself no favors in subsequent years. Desperate to shake the old narratives, he tried bizarre, attention-grabbing stunts that baffled the public. In promoting a new album, White People Party Music, he posted a photo of himself in whiteface, calling himself a white character and using hashtags that played on racial stereotypes like good credit and farmers markets. This was not well received. Many considered it a tasteless and unfunny marketing attempt. While the historical injustice of blackface is well documented, whites painting themselves black to mock black people and reinforce racist stereotypes, the concept of whiteface does not have the same cultural and historical baggage. Few white people truly felt oppressed or offended in a structural sense by a black entertainer donning white makeup. Instead, the universal criticism sprang from the stunt's transparent desperation and lame humor. It further eroded Cannon's image as someone who could be taken seriously in music or entertainment as an edgy, risk-taking comedian. He ended up scrubbing traces of that experiment from his platforms. Another dubious moment came when Cannon made statements that sounded racist, or at least uncomfortably reductive. In one interview, when pressed about racism, Cannon boasted, "I'm very racist," and tried to twist the definition of racism to justify his pride. Given that his comment was edited or truncated, the full context remained unclear, but the snippet that circulated painted him as someone either too careless or too eager to shock. At best, it was another tone-deaf attempt to break from his corny image. At worst, it was an unnecessary provocation that only further tarnished public opinion. Despite misfires like this, Cannon continued to thrive professionally. He got divorced from Mariah Carey in 2016, ending their high-profile union quietly and respectfully. While some celebrity couples engage in bitter public disputes and custody battles, the two parted ways with minimal drama, which was admirable in an era when public meltdowns were commonplace. Yet Cannon moved on with lightning speed. Just 3 months after finalizing the divorce, he welcomed another child with Brittany Bell, named Golden Sagon. Over the next few years, he seemed to embrace a lifestyle of relentless procreation. He fathered a staggering number of children with multiple women in a short span, an act that drew widespread commentary. Some wondered if he was trying to build a legacy, or if he saw himself as a modern patriarch who could maintain healthy, supportive relationships with multiple partners and children simultaneously. Yet even as Cannon's personal life became a talking point, he could not let go of old grievances. Eminem lingered in his psyche. Cannon publicly insisted he would love to have Eminem on Wild 'N Out to settle their differences, freestyle style. He brought up their past beef on podcasts and interviews, reminding people that he once truly considered confronting Eminem physically. Eventually, Eminem responded minimally to Cannon's attempts at rekindling a lyrical battle, throwing a few lines at him on a Fat Joe track, Lord Above, in 2019. Eminem's mention was brief and dismissive, mocking Cannon as a neutered husband to Mariah, who almost got into a physical altercation but never followed through. Cannon fired back with not one, not two, but 3 diss tracks, none of which managed to gain traction. They had the unintended effect of making Cannon look even more desperate. Fans and critics pointed out that without Eminem's engagement, Cannon was essentially flailing in the wind, calling out an opponent who had little incentive to respond. Cannon tried to say this was all in the spirit of hip-hop, a friendly attempt to get him on Wild 'N Out, but no one bought the explanation. It seemed that Cannon lived rent-free in Eminem's mind for a while, then the tables turned, and now Eminem occupied a prime piece of real estate in Cannon's psyche, haunting behind him. As if feuding with one of rap's greatest lyricists was not complicated enough, Cannon got entangled in a more serious controversy in 2020. On an episode of his podcast Cannon's Class, he interviewed Professor Griff, a former member of Public Enemy who was infamously kicked out of the group for anti-Semitic comments in the late 1980s. During the show, Cannon made comments that many perceived as perpetuating anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and racist ideologies. He spoke of non-melanated people lacking natural sunlight tolerance and thus becoming savages. He also mentioned those controlling power structures and finances in a way that echoed old conspiracies. The response was swift. Viacom, the parent company behind many of Cannon's shows, announced they were terminating their relationship with him. This was a seismic moment, as Cannon had been intricately tied to Viacom's networks, Nickelodeon, MTV, for decades. He apologized extensively, wrote a long Facebook essay, reached out to Jewish community leaders, and embarked on what some called an apology tour. He educated himself publicly, engaged in dialogues to understand why his comments were hurtful, and eventually earned back Viacom's trust. His deal and shows were restored, but the damage was done. To some, this confirmed that Cannon's attempts at being provocative or insightful often fell flat, revealing ignorance or misguided attempts at intellectualism. For others, it was a redemption arc. He had the humility to learn, to listen, and to correct course. If Nick Cannon thought life would settle down after repairing his professional relationships, he was mistaken. He ignited fresh debates when he seemingly set out to father as many children as possible in rapid succession. It became almost a running headline. Cannon fathered child after child with different women in a dizzying timeline. Golden Sagan's birth was followed by powerful queen, born to the same mother, Brittany Bell. 6 months after powerful queen's birth, twins Zion Mixolydian and Zillion Eyre arrived to mother Abby De La Rosa. 2 weeks after those twins, another child, Zen, was born to Alyssa Scott. Tragically, Zen died of brain cancer at just 6 months old. Cannon continued fathering legendary love with Bree Teesey, then Onyx Cole with Lanisha Cole, then Rise Messiah with Brittany Bell again, followed by more children announced with Abby De La Rosa and Alyssa Scott. This rapid expansion of his family challenged many people's understanding of fatherhood responsibility and what it means to be present as a parent. Critics argue that while Cannon might be financially able to support them, it is impossible for him to be emotionally available to such a large brood scattered across multiple households. Even among open-minded observers, questions arise. Is he building a healthy family dynamic? Or is he feeding his ego by populating the world with offspring he cannot possibly give equal attention? Cannon has defended his choices, assuring the public that when he is not working, he devotes all his time to his children. He insists that love, attention, and care are abundant in these arrangements. Yet skeptics remain unconvinced. They say that no matter how large his fortune grows, there are only so many hours in a day, and each child deserves a meaningful, hands-on relationship with their father. Others invoke the comparisons to historical patterns of wealthy men fathering many children with multiple partners, noting that this setup rarely brings long-term emotional stability. Still, Cannon stands by his decisions, and perhaps only time will tell what relationships he maintains with these children as they grow older and become more aware of their father's public image, their half-siblings, and the complicated family tree that binds them. It is not difficult to imagine that one day, as these children seek their identity, some might resent him or at least struggle with their place in his sprawling lineage. It is undeniable that Cannon's track record is mixed. He fled the dangers of gang influence as a child and turned himself into a Hollywood success story. He was never consistently embraced by the cultural mainstream as cool, but he maneuvered behind the scenes, producing shows, hosting popular programs, and forging deals that gave him immense creative freedom. He helped launch countless comedic careers, ultimately returning the favor Will Smith once showed him. He married one of the most famous singers in the world and handled the breakup with maturity. He engaged in petty feuds that did not serve his image well, and he stumbled into controversies that risked his livelihood and forced him to reconsider the narratives he was pushing. Today, he remains a polarizing figure. Most people remember him as the corny guy with a lot of kids, rather than the accomplished businessman, producer, and host he has proven himself to be repeatedly. From a historical and cultural standpoint, the story of Nick Cannon could be placed within the broader tapestry of Black entertainers who grapple with public perception shaped by early roles and limited by stereotypes. He never became the universally admired cultural icon that some of his contemporaries did, but he achieved what so many struggled to do. He created, produced, and sustained a platform, Wild and Out, that influenced the comedic landscape. His personal life and paternal approach may be unusual or even objectionable to some, but no one can deny he has navigated unprecedented territory with a peculiar confidence. Perhaps the world overestimates the importance of cool and underestimates the importance of endurance and adaptability in a turbulent industry. Yet there are warnings here for Cannon's future. History shows that as children of celebrities grow older, they can become more vocal, sometimes developing resentments when they feel they did not receive the nurturing environment they deserved. Consider 50 Cent's strained relationship with his son Marquise, whom he once chillingly referenced in a social media post involving a scenario of potential harm. If such a successful rapper and cultural figure like 50 Cent could fail at maintaining a functional relationship with his child, then Cannon, with an even larger number of offspring and a more intricate set of familial arrangements, might face an even more complicated situation 20 years down the line. One hopes that Cannon's claim to devote himself wholeheartedly whenever he is not working holds true, that his children grow up feeling loved, supported, and guided by their father. It would be unfortunate if all his empire building and financial security failed to translate into the emotional bond that defines good parenting. In the end, Nick Cannon's story is about much more than a single entertainer's career trajectory. It touches on how the entertainment industry shapes public perception and stereotypes, how early roles can trap a performer's image, how hip-hop feuds can spiral into cultural soap operas, and how attempts to break molds can often backfire. It also involves America's long-standing struggles with race, religion, bigotry, and the potent cocktail of fame, money, and attention in the age of social media. Cannon might indeed be overhated, suffering a public relations problem disproportionate to any real moral failing. Sure, He can be annoying, awkward, or tone-deaf at times. He can appear desperate for credibility, respect, or admiration he has never fully earned. Yet he is neither a monster nor a villain, and there have certainly been far worse role models for younger generations. He made mistakes, apologized, learned, and continued to create job opportunities for others. That alone is more than many high-profile celebrities can claim. Before concluding, let us not omit any details from the original text. At one point it mentioned a sponsor, the Ridge Wallet, which Cannon had absolutely nothing to do with personally, but it appeared as part of the original narrative. The narrator of that original piece had a gunmetal Ridge wallet that looked clean and futuristic, fitting comfortably into a pocket all day, easy to access thanks to a cutout for cards, and included a money clip for cash. The Ridge Company offered a test drive of 45 days and a full refund if unsatisfied, with over 50,000 five-star reviews. Additionally, there was a burnt titanium key case that organizes keys quietly. They offered an up to 40% off deal through December 22nd at ridge.com/PatrickCC. This random product promotion was part of the original content, and though it had no bearing on Nick Cannon's life or controversies, it cannot be omitted as per the instructions. Nick Cannon's path, from a child navigating the rough streets of southeastern San Diego and the Lincoln Park Blood's shadows, to a teenage breakout on Nickelodeon, to a mogul who launched and sustained a multi-decade television series, to a figure who engaged in rap beef with one of the genre's most controversial superstars, to a father who continues to add branches to his ever-growing family tree. This path is winding, unconventional, and riddled with contradictions. It shows us how American audiences can fixate on an entertainer's shortcomings and never let go, how a single label, corny, can stick for a lifetime. It also underscores the complexity of fatherhood in modern celebrity culture, where wealth and fame replace traditional structures, but do not necessarily provide the emotional foundation children require. Cannon's actions sometimes seemed at odds with his public statements, and at other times he tried too hard to appear edgy or intellectual, resulting in the opposite of what he intended. Some of the adversity he faced is a byproduct of a culture that loves to build up child stars, then delights in tearing them down when they fail to represent what fans imagine they should become. Other aspects are on him alone: words spoken, alliances made, attempts at humor that crashed and burned, and fatherly ambitions that many believe go beyond practicality. And yet in the grand narrative of Hollywood's long history, Nick Cannon is not the first celebrity to be misunderstood, nor will he be the last. The industry is filled with actors who never shook their early images, musicians who let feuds define their reputations, public figures who tried to challenge social narratives and face swift backlash. Cannon's missteps with anti-Semitic conspiracy talk and his clumsy attempts at engaging in racial dialogues that ended in apologies illustrate that, in today's climate, words carry heavy consequences. At the same time, his willingness to learn and to repair professional relationships speaks to resilience. In a future not yet written, when his children are grown, the narrative around Nick Cannon might shift again. Possibly, he will be praised for providing financial stability and opportunities for his children that he never had. Or he might be criticized for their sense of emotional neglect, mirroring the generational trauma he once avoided by not fully succumbing to the gang life he left behind. Perhaps he will find redemption in evolving cultural standards as society recognizes he was never truly malicious, just misguided and clumsy at times. He may even forge new creative ventures that recast him in a different light, reminding everyone that he is, in fact, a clever businessman and a cultural contributor. After all, decades later, people still debate the nature of his feud with Eminem, who to this day is considered one of the greatest MCs, but also a figure known for feuds and controversies. Maybe in another 20 years, the Eminem canon tension will be seen as a quaint footnote in rap history, overshadowed by new generational battles and shifting tastes in music, comedy, and television. Until then, public sentiment remains layered with skepticism and ridicule. People who knew nothing else about him will recall that he had a dozen children with multiple women. Others will remember Mariah Carey's voice hitting those whistle notes while Nick played the supportive husband in the background. Some may note his role in promoting improv comedians who eventually joined Saturday Night Live or built their own successful platforms. A few might recall that he challenged Viacom, apologized to Jewish leaders, and got his shows back. Most will still shake their heads, unable to articulate precisely why he irritates them, relying on the convenient shorthand that he is corny and not talented. But a closer look reveals a complex figure who embodies many contradictions of the modern entertainment world. Calling him simply corny does not do justice to the layers of his journey. He might be the awkward kid who never fully shook his initial image, but he is also the resilient producer, the savvy entrepreneur, the flawed but reflective man, the eager father, and the entertainer who somehow remained ever present in a harsh, unforgiving industry. In the absence of a neat resolution, Nick Cannon's legacy remains under construction, continually shaped by new life decisions, career moves, apologies, triumphs, and stumbles. Time will tell whether this narrative ends in vindication, regret, or something in between. For now, the world watches, comments, and judges as it always has, uncertain about what to make of this boy from the projects who never seemed to become what anyone fully wanted him to be, yet refused to disappear and consistently found ways to stay relevant.